This graphic has been placed on my page and given a text wrap so the text flows right past it. If I double-click in this text to switch to the Type tool, I can drag over it and you can see that the text is one stream right over the image. It looks pretty good right now, but what if I need to edit the text? It's imperative that that graphic and the caption underneath it stay together. But if I come over here and just grab some text and delete it, well, we have problems. The text moved, but the graphic didn't. How can we tell the picture to move along with the text? Well, to do that, we need an inline or an anchored object. Let me undo what I just did with a Command-Z or Control-Z, and I'm going to turn this object into an inline object. To do that, I'm first going to give it its own line to sit on. So I'm going to click at the end of this paragraph and just press a return. I want that graphic to be on that line as though it were text. To do that, I'm going to choose the Selection tool, click on the image itself, and cut it to the clipboard. Now I'm going to switch back to the Type tool, place the cursor inside that blank line, and paste. When you cut or copy with the Selection tool and then paste with the Type tool, the object becomes an inline object. It's sitting there right on that paragraph. Now, it doesn't look quite right, of course, and that's because this paragraph has an absolute leading. I talk about leading in a later chapter, but for right now, I'm just going to point out that I can drag over that line with the Type tool and change the leading here in the control panel from an absolute 15 to an auto leading. Auto leading is great for inline objects because it says, just take however much space you need. I'll move the text around to make it fit. Also, I'm going to make this paragraph centered by going to the right side of my control panel and clicking on the Center Alignment button. That looks much better. Now, this object is in line, so if I make that same kind of edit, like taking out a bunch of text, it flows with the text. If I add text, I'll just type a bunch of gibberish here, you'll see that as I'm typing, it's moving down. Let's look at another example. I'm going to press Option page down or Alt page down to go to my next spread, and I'm going to zoom in on this part of this page. I have an object out here in the margin, and I'd like to make that an inline object. I want to put it right into this paragraph up here. Instead of using the cut and paste method, I'm going to show you a slightly different method. See this little blue box in the upper right corner? If I hold down the Shift key on my keyboard and drag that box into the text, you'll see a black line show up wherever I drag. That black line means this is where it's going to be anchored or placed in line as soon as I let go of the mouse button. For example, if I put it right before this word memling, you'll see that it gets anchored or inline right there. Let me pan down a little bit so we can see this better. Now in this case, I want the object to be really small, like a little icon before that word. So I'm going to drag this down to be the proper size. Once again, I'm going to switch back to the Type tool, place my cursor in the text, and just type a little gibberish. That icon moves along with the text because it really acts as though it were a single character in the flow. But what if I don't want that object inline, inside the text moving around? What if I want to have it outside of the text frame in the margin where it was originally? To do that, I need to turn it into an anchored object, not an inline object. I'm going to press Command-Z or Control-Z a few times to go back to where it was before I anchored it, and I'm going to move it into position. Now, instead of holding down the Shift key while I drag the little anchor box, I'm simply going to drag the anchor box with no modifier key. I still get that little black bar, but it does something different. I'm going to let go of this right before the word "the" at the beginning of the paragraph, and when I do that, you'll see that that little blue box turns into an anchor icon. That anchor icon says that it's an anchored object in the text flow, and it's anchored right into that position I placed it before the T. While inline objects can only be inside of a text frame, an anchored object can go anywhere I want. I can drag this anywhere, outside the frame, inside the frame, doesn't matter. And the cool thing is, as I type in here, I'll just type a bunch of gibberish, you'll see that that thing keeps moving down. It's anchored to that position in the text. If I delete all of that, it moves back up. Now I'm going to use the Selection tool to drag it a little bit further in, so it's covering up some of that text. I obviously don't want it to cover up the text entirely, so I'll go to the Window menu, choose Text Wrap, and turn on Text Wrap for that object. I want the text to flow around the object so that I can see the icon and the text. Well, the Text Wrap is doing something very strange here. This is a quirk in InDesign. You just have to understand how it's going to work, and you can work around it. When you apply a text wrap to an anchored object in InDesign, you have to understand that it only applies to lines after the line that it's anchored in. So in this case, this icon is anchored before that letter T, and so it will not apply to that whole line. It does apply to all the lines after it, but it doesn't apply to that line or any lines before where it's anchored. So if I want this to work, I need to reposition the anchored object. And I'm going to do that by dragging that little anchor icon out, and I'm going to put it at the end of the previous paragraph. Technically, it's anchored after this word Ursula, but it's still positioned out here. So as this text is edited, the icon will continue to flow with it, but it text wraps properly. One last thing I should point out about these anchored objects, and that's how to get them unanchored again. To do that, I simply select the anchored object, go to the Object menu, and choose from the Anchored Object submenu, Release. That object is now no longer anchored in the text. Now, there's a lot more you can do with anchored and inline objects in your documents, but the important thing is to see that you can quickly set up these relationships between text and objects.